Welcome to Stampscaping 101. We're going to finish off a stamp sketch done in the previous video. And this one is obviously a autumn scene with the maple leaves and a maple setting in the covered bridge large. All right, now what I'm doing here is I'm laying down a base layer of antique linen. It doesn't have to be antique linen, but it's just a light, warm base layer. It's very light, so it's not a big commitment to value in terms of light and dark. And this is a little, I wouldn't call it a trick, but it's just a process that they use often in oil painting, or I don't know, maybe they even do it in acrylics. Probably not watercolors, but in terms of oil paints, this is something I learned a long time ago in a beginning oil painting class, is just laying down kind of a warm base layer, no matter what kind of dominant color temperature the painting would be about, even a nighttime type of scene with cool tones. This little warm base layer kind of provides a nice little glow to your overall color scheme. Okay, now what I'm doing right here, these first colors that you lay down can also kind of be the guide for what is going to be your lighting scheme, okay? Now the difference between coloring something and coloring and lighting at the same time, because we're not using something like a light bulb in the back of these pieces of paper or something like that, is all I do is I just retain some of the white of the paper, and that is going to represent lighting in the scene, in the end result. Okay, so on here I'm mentioning that I have an area of light above the trees, and then an area of what represents reflected light down on the road. Now the road is a perfect opportunity for a lit area. Oftentimes my lead-in areas such as roads or rivers or streams or anything like that, I usually have it being, I usually have it light. A waterfall could be light. You want to have something that, it's like if you were walking somewhere and you had an illuminated path or something like that. You feel compelled to go down that path. If there's another path that's dark, you know, from an emotional standpoint, we probably don't want to go down that way. That would be the kind of the difference between, I don't know, like a horror movie or something like that, where there's this really dark path, and then there's this other one that's illuminated. You know, one area just seems a little bit friendlier from an emotional standpoint. Okay, so I'm going in now with Memento Summer Sky. It's just a light blue. Now remember, you can substitute any of these, and let's say you don't have a really pale version of blue like this summer sky, you can always apply a different blue ink to an applicator, and you can apply a very dry version of it, which would give you a lighter value of that existing color. Okay, now this one right here it's more of a, kind of a, almost a, I wouldn't call it a turquoise blue, but it has a little bit of warmth in it. It's called Caribbean blue. So, but just anything of that value, it would be a perfect color to lay over the antique linen and that summer sky. The summer sky was barely showing up, you know, even when I put it on at full strength. So I went to that Caribbean blue there. But something like a middle, you know, mid-tone blue, mid-value blue would be a good one to go with. Okay, so I've added that in there. Now notice up in that sky area, a lot of times we would feel kind of compelled to fill that in with blue, which you could do, okay? But if you fill that in with a blue, let's say it's that Caribbean blue even, which is a fairly light blue, it would be darker than those, than some of those leaves. But I want those leaves to look like they're illuminated, okay? So I have to leave something in the scene that's lighter than those leaves, so it would look like there's a light source, okay? So it's kind of the difference between, say, I don't know, reality or going out in nature and representing light using white paper, okay? There's, you know, when we go outside, there's actual light from the sun, the moon, if it's at night. But on a piece of paper, we have to give the illusion of light, which means that we are utilizing contrast. So, you know, like I said, if we turn off all the lights right here and look at this scene right here, there's nothing. It'd be completely black. So again, this is what we do to create lighting within. I don't know what it doesn't not you know, it doesn't have to be a card or stamping. It's paintings, anything that where we're subject to having to utilize reflected light to represent a light source or reflected light within a, you know, piece of art. Okay, so that was the dye-based inks. I didn't do too much of it on this one because I really wanted to use more of the different pens, pencils on this scene. I do a lot of things with dye-based inks, but I do like using my alcohol inks and things like colored pencils. So if you didn't watch the previous video, this scene was stamped on a paper called Mohawk Everyday Digital White Coated Silk, and this is the 100-pound cover. You see it on, it's usually used by the printing industry, so you'll find it at places like Kelly Paper, but there are some sources for this type of paper. There's not too many because, again, this is more of like a printing, like a professional printer's paper, like all cardstocks are, but a lot of cardstocks are, you know, like Nina's. They, you know, different paper companies started marketing it towards the individual as opposed to a company. But I do have sources for all this type of thing on in the information section of the Stampscapes website, in the materials FAQ, or the off-site accessories links. Okay, and again, that's in the information section on stampscapes.com. Okay, so I laid down some alcohol inks in different variations of that warm color scheme, yellow, orange, red. And now I'm going into this piece using colored pencils. Colored pencils are really the perfect opportunity for detailed, targeted color. So what I like to do with colored pencils, again, like the dye-based inks, is I'm kind of working from a light color and I'll work incrementally darker, okay? So that first color I was using was kind of like a tan, so that was perfect for like the covered bridge and the road. I'm filling in here more with this turquoise colored, blue colored pencil now to get a little bit more, maybe a targeted area around those leaves. It's hard to do blue behind those leaves with, you know, the sponging technique, but you can really get wherever you want with a colored pencil. Okay, now here's where I'm using a black colored pencil, but one of the things that you might notice is I'm not using it everywhere on, say, that colored bridge. I used it on the vertical sides to create this illusion that light is coming from above. So the rooftop is lighter than the vertical sides, the walls and the front of it, okay? But I don't do it equally over the whole thing. I kind of have it varied, and here I'm kind of mentioning, okay, I'm adding in kind of darker areas in the shadow areas of a design. Okay, so watch this where I'm doing this. I'm kind of just scribbling around. See the side wall of that covered bridge? It's a little bit darker on one area, a little bit lighter. So don't color things uniformly, okay? See, you can really tell with the black. See, I'm leaving some areas on those walls different. So it's a varied, I guess, shadow or lighting scheme on the structure itself. It looks more aged that way, and it looks more natural that way because, you know, out in nature, you're going to have, you know, clouds or something like that. So there's oscillating lights and darks. And that's the same thing I did for that rooftop. The rooftop was a little bit too uniform, so I put a little bit of shadow on a certain area of it, okay? It doesn't make for a harder process, but it really takes out the need or necessity for kind of the notion of perfect coloring. Now, a lot of you are probably used to doing things. They want things absolutely filled in. A lot of people that use pencils like it completely smooth, no texture at all, perfectly smooth, like a kind of a machine kind of, you know, applicated color or media, all right? But I don't approach things that way. I like it a lot more varied, and I guess you could call it loose. I mean, it's not haphazard or anything like that, but you kind of want a looser feel to things, and kind of it gives it more of a hand made or applied type of look. And that's actually desirable. If you're going to art school, strokes and texture and brush strokes showing are very desired. I'm not quite sure where this idea came up in the crafting industry that you don't want any streaks showing anywhere, or textures. You want it completely smooth, so things like Gamasol and things like that on colored pencils, or completely no marker kind of textured looks, are desirable. Now, that might be good for certain areas, but I would certainly contrast it with some textured areas, okay? All right, now here's the paint pens right here. Paint pens are a really fantastic medium for all kinds of different things, but they have so many different colors in paint pens now that we can add a lot of different types of textures and built up colors. It gives it kind of more of a shimmery type of look when you use these paint pens like this. So what I did, okay, here's what I do. On dye-based inks and alcohol inks, I usually work from light to dark. But on these trees, I laid down the darker dots first, okay? And then I'm putting the lighter ones on top of it so that they stand out from that darker background a little bit more, giving it a more three-dimensional look. Now, it's not exactly that. I mean, I might add some darker ones, not put any light over it. It's varied. I mean, it looks fine as is right now. You can leave it at that, but I like to build it up going all the way to the white pen. So I added like a reddish tinge. Well, it was a little bit more of an orange. Now I'm going with the yellow, and then I'll end up with the white, though. Okay, now one of the things, there's different aspects to color, things like temperature, warm, cool, value, light to dark. There's the hue, just what color is it, red, blue, yellow, green. But then there's also intensity, which is bright or dull. Okay, bright is not to be mistaken with light. Okay, there could be a very bright dark blue. It's just the relative intensity of it. Okay. So we can see in here that those maple leaves are really intense, and the maple trees in the background are really intense, okay? But the sky, the covered bridge, and the foreground look relatively dull next to it, don't they? So what I'll try to do is I'll try to balance all that out and kind of get it more integrated. So that's the challenge here, using these really bright colors, which kind of is suited for this type of scenario here, but I want things to match up a little bit more. So that's what I generally am thinking about at this point in time as I'm applying these brighter tones into the mix. Okay, so here comes some white. And see, I'm kind of adding that little white in that area on top of the roof that I have left white, or lighter at least, from the colored pencils and pens and whatnot. I added some blue down there in that stream, which colored all of my rocks down there. So I'm just kind of bringing those rocks back out a little bit with a little bit of highlighting back on the white. So these things like this white pen here are really great tools. It kind of gets rid of the need for a lot of careful applications of other colors, because you can just bring out whatever, the lighting or definition, again, with a white pen. So, so I don't do masking and most of the time, because there's no need to, because I can utilize these other types of media to reclaim kind of what might have been lost from coloring over it in just a very general area. Okay, so I'm showing that rooftop there and that lighting on top of it, and see how that really contrasts nicely with the darker vertical side, the walls of the bridge. So we have that lighting. It represents, reflective lighting coming from above. If you ever want to see a video on easy scenic lighting, just type in Stampscapes, easy lighting, and I have several videos devoted to that. But you can generally see it here. There's an area of light in the sky, and it's separated by an area of darkness, which is the trees and the covered bridge there. And then there's an area of light down that road. So there's light up top and light down below, and it's light down below just happens to be the road. But even if that road wasn't there, if it was just a meadow, say, for example, and that was a cabin instead of a covered bridge, you would just leave a little bit of the meadow illuminated. Okay, here's one of my favorite parts of the or techniques to do with the scene here. I'm adding this white pigment ink in a very light, kind of airy fashion, and I'm starting it in the lighter area. Now, if I just tapped it only in that sky area, we wouldn't be able to see it because it would be tapping white into a very light area. But then what I do is I creep it or just go into the surrounding objects around that light. And so you can see that light reflecting now off of those leaves. It's not reflecting, it's covering it, but in the scene standpoint, that's what it represents. It represents that light kind of shining on those leaves. And look how it gives those leaves a real dimension. Plus, putting it over some leaves, it kind of pushes those leaves that you put that over into the background, so it gives your foreground even more depth. Okay, now this is where I'm going to kind of integrate the bridge a little bit more with the surrounding area. See how I'm kind of putting this over it? So it's adding this tone over the top of the brighter colors in here. Now I'm not going to try to mute them all out, but I'm muting them out in a very targeted area. So I'm coming into that bridge a little bit. I have it going into the trees. And what it's doing is it's setting the bridge into the scene a little bit more. And it's just giving more continuity to the overall scene. It kind of embeds it in there because there's this kind of fog that's kind of going throughout the piece. Okay, now one of the things that I didn't say because it was zoomed out too far, but those black foreground reeds and leaves, maple leaves, are done in a VersaFine Clair, which is a oil-based black pigment ink. A lot of you might have that stamp pad already. There it is right there. It's really awesome because it is one of the darkest blacks you can possibly use. But alcohol inks, you know, the binder is alcohol, and alcohol can dissolve oil. No problem, right? You can clean off like an oil stain with, you know, some alcohol if you have it somewhere. So that's what happened. I forgot about that, and I went over those reeds with an alcohol pen. So here, I just kind of fogged it over a little bit with some pigment ink, and I'm re-stamping another layer of reeds right over that. So it actually turns out pretty good because there's actually now a little bit more foreground depth right amongst those reeds. See, some of those reeds are kind of covered in white pigment ink, so they look a little bit farther back than the darker reeds in the same area. All right, so that is the scene right there. We see our scenic lighting. The applications here are pretty simplistic. It's, you know, it's a lot about coloring in terms of the grasses. I'm showing the one that I'll do next in kind of more of a spring color scheme. But there it is. That's mixed media there. And just work your media in order, okay? Which means that if I put down that white pigment ink first, you know, I couldn't go over it with the dye-based inks. So you go dye-based inks, and then I went into the alcohol pens, then the colored pencil, and then the white pigment ink over the top of it. So you just kind of have to think about those things in order. It's not too complicated. I mean, we know that if we lay down, you know, colored pencil or something like that, it's going to be hard to apply a, you know, a water-based, dye-based ink over the top of it. It would just come right off. So, you know, that makes sense. The paint pens really go over everything too, those acrylic paint pens. So you can even, you know, color on glass with it or something like that, and it'll stick. Metals work fine. But anyways, I had fun doing this scene. You can see that kind of, I don't know if you can see that kind of warmer glow coming through the blue. That blue would look very different without that antique linen. It would look fine though, but I just think that this gives it a little bit more kind of an emotional warmth to it. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, drop me a note in the comments section.